All right, welcome everybody to our latest Live Motocross podcast. As I'm joined by special guest, former racer and now trainer in Nathan Crawford, who runs 00 Elite Rider Training here in Australia, and obviously former Aussie champ and races stateside. Jackson Richardson, regular co-host. We're joined by him too. Firstly, thank you everyone for listening and supporting the site. We really appreciate it. We'd also like to thank our partners in Fly Racing, Firepower, Fuchs Silkaline, and Dirt Store for their incredible support, as without them, none of this be possible. All right, firstly, welcome, Nathan. How's life? And thanks for joining us, mate. You're obviously recovering from a little bit of an injury yourself, mate, but you're still going well and the program's in full swing, no doubt.
Yeah, we're just finishing off the motocross season. We're getting better as the season goes on, but we were a little bit late to start with some of the weather and stuff. Personally, I've had a crash a couple of weeks ago and the trapezium bone in my thumb and a few ribs on my back, but that only held me out for a few days. Had to show up again to work on Wednesday, so wasn't the most fun driving into Glen Echo through the 20 minutes of dirt road with a couple of ribs.
Oh, I didn't know you did that. Far out, mate. That's brutal.
Yeah.
And you're just back at it, just no days off.
Oh, I have to prove to the boys that mental strength's key.
Yeah, hey, that's it. I tell you what, it's probably a blessing in disguise because you got to show the boys, hey, look, I'm out here just still getting after it, broken ribs and all. So you boys, hey, don't be complaining about no injuries. You just got to do it.
It was a pretty interesting thing because we camped out there the night as well, and then I was struggling to get out of the mattress in the morning and shit, and then walked over and they're like, "Holy shit, you look sore." No complaints, but they're all pretty happy that I was there. So
yeah, was it cold as hell out there too? Because even don't worry, I noticed it. I'm only 30 now, but I notice all the old injuries nowadays, especially when it gets cold. So man, I could imagine how the body must be feeling out there, especially if it's cold as.
we were watching the State of Origin till half time with the whole crew on the Wednesday night, and then it was that cold. Everyone went, "Nut, we're out. We're going to bed." So
Yeah.
no one really made it past 8:35.
Oh man, yeah. They put the games on too late nowadays. Anyway, if it's a shit game, then don't worry, I'm out to it anyway. I got to get me sleep in.
No, absolutely. Obviously, Jatz, we've already heard from you, mate, but how are you? And thanks for joining us again. Obviously, you had the wedding on the weekend. You punched out a round of golf beforehand. So how was it all, mate?
Oh yeah, well actually that went awry. I wasn't able to play golf because they had the members only
Oh,
comp on that day, so I was spewing. Couldn't get out for a game of golf, so I almost felt like I was held hostage up there. The wedding was pretty good though. Got to crush a few beers while I was there, so that was good. But yeah, no, weekend off. So yeah, but I was back in the lab this week, just absolutely grinding in the net, putting the back out every day, so I can come out and try win the local comp this weekend.
oh, mate, sounds awesome. And yeah, mate, you're certainly flat out on the program. Some good content over the weekend as well to keep us all entertained.
Oh yeah, big time. I mean, Redbud was an absolute treat for sure. I mean, it was a wild weekend in terms of racing. So yeah, it kept me going with some good content.
Absolutely, mate. And obviously, on to you, Nate. For anyone that doesn't know about you, there's some really good programs running out of Australia, like obviously yours. You got the Beatons Pro Formula, Ford Dale, and some other ones. So just tell us all about your program. It's all encompassing, mate. So much work goes into making it happen. Obviously, Fighting Fit Physio, you have a connection with them too. And yeah, it's a no stone unturned approach, mate. You certainly dedicate yourself to making the best program for these riders, and the results speak for themselves, don't they?
Yeah, we put in our best effort. We try and make sure that we've got the tracks to train on. That's probably one of been the biggest struggle this year is trying to find some softer tracks in Queensland. Since sort of Coolum's gone and a few of the forestries have closed down the riding, through those areas, it's been really hard to find tracks. But we've been getting that done. And then Dean from Fighting Fit runs mostly off bike training for the guys. And then we try and encompass it all to make sure that the schedule works between their training off the bike, on the bike, and then obviously travel to the races as well, because there's a fair bit of travel mid-season that goes on. So, takes some time to manage, but yeah, it's all good in the outcomes. So we're getting better as the season goes on, and it's getting more positive and more positive for most of the riders.
Yeah, is there like another shortage of tracks going on down there, Nate? Because it's been a while since I've been in Brisbane. Are there just more tracks closing, and then a lot of the tracks like out in the bush that we used to go ride, like the sand tracks and that, are they just going away now?
So they're basically most of those sand tracks are housing developments now.
Ah, yeah.
and then if you're in the other ones, I think it's a $600 fine for being in there.
Oh.
And then because our crew's sort of the 10 to 12 rider capacity with the futures crew, a lot of our private tracks can't handle the noise, so we can't use a lot of the private tracks we used to ride because we've got too many volume wise, but we've got to be at that to make it viable.
Yeah, geez, that must make it tough to get stuff done.
Yeah, we've got some really good people that are helping us out with some tracks and stuff like that. They put in their time. Jatz from Tattoo Racing he come on board and started helping prep tracks for us and stuff like that just for fun. And then he sort of sits by and watches the boys practice. That's his sort of goal for his retirement, he reckons.
Yeah, that's not a bad gig to jump into.
Yeah. So he says, all his older mates play golf. Now he's retired and he not interested. So he preps tracks for it.
Oh, he didn't get bitten by the golf bug like I did. I just transitioned straight into full-time golfer as soon as I hung the boots up. I'm like, yeah, this is my life now.
Yeah, I don't know how you do it. It frustrated me. I used to play golf with a couple of mates that were pro golfers, and they used to come riding when I was riding, and give each other tips and that. But I got to a point where golf was frustrating to me because you knew what you should be doing.
Yeah.
Do it, so it's like tucking the front in every turn.
Oh yeah, it's the most mentally infuriating game that there possibly is.
Yeah, but most of the crew play it as a off game now as well. So I know Reese and Nato and that go out a bit together, and I don't think they're very good, but
yeah. It's a competitive juices flowing, doesn't it, for those races, and obviously just the average bloke too. So I wanted to touch on. Remember last time we spoke, you had a really cool idea, for the future to having like a compound kind of setup where you have like accommodation, tracks all in the one setup, which would be really awesome to have like a one-stop shop, maybe integrate some sort of schooling as well there at some point. Obviously, you mentioned there was some government issues with that, but just the sheer amount of time, like travel, you're wasted. Jatz knows it well, so far to get to, your QMPs and stuff if you're living in the Gold Coast or in that Brisbane area, just so much downtime. So I don't know if you've looked into that expansion, mate. Obviously, there's a lot of blokes from interstate interested in your program you were mentioning too, mate. But yeah, I like the ambition, mate, and hopefully you can make it into reality one day, even though there's obvious challenges.
Yeah, so the main challenge with that is actually local councils and stuff. They don't really want us, if you go and buy 100 acres, they're not really that interested in letting you put a facility there. So we're trying to juggle with a couple of the private parks as well to see if we can organise something to, lease parts of their land or things like that to have our own track and facilities on for like Supercross and that. Because motocross is not so bad because of the amount of ride parks down here, but with Supercross, it's a specialised thing. So we're sort of in the game, sort of juggling with a couple of parks at the moment to see if we can put Supercross tracks in there. But yeah, it's a hard thing to make viable because the Supercross track only runs for 3 months and it doesn't cost any less to put it together. So, but yeah, we're struggling with that. We've been looking at a couple of different avenues for housing and stuff like that, but it's just the cost of living in Queensland, especially on the south side, is nothing short of ridiculous now. So I think going that far out, I don't know how much further you can go to capitalize the people. No one wants to be sort of 3 hours out in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, it's getting a bit harder.
Yeah. Oh man, it's tough. Especially like that's like one thing of like why I always prefer just to be in Cairns rather than being down south, because like just the travel that you got to do every day to go to the track and do your laps and then go to the gym and like do a full day of training to get everything in, like it's almost impossible. And yeah, just with the way like local councils and that seem to be cracking down now. I know they're doing it a bit up in Cairns now too, whereas it used to just be free reign up here. But yeah, nowadays everyone's just really cracking down on it. I imagine that's just frustrating as.
Yeah, I think the main thing for the boys, it's a 6 till 6 gig now. So you've got to leave at 6, you've got to travel an hour and a bit to the track. Then you're at the track from then till 2 o'clock, and then it's an hour back to the gym, then gym back to home. So they've got to make sure that they're dedicated to it. So.
Oh yeah, it'll teach you quick whether you want it or not, doing the full days down there, that's for sure.
Yeah, and a few of the boys, they get up and road cycle before they leave or train before they leave as well. So a few of the more seasoned guys. So it definitely comes as a bit of a shock to the younger guys. The younger guys seem to get affected a lot more by the driving and the travel than the old guys. And then they start shortcutting things like breakfast and lunches and stuff like that instead of having it all pre-made and planned. And then they wonder why their results are going backwards.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah, you can definitely see why, the motocross industry in America is moving away from California to that more space, the facility side of things with Star Racing. You look at the Triumph doing the same thing. You got the Baker's factory. It'd be an absolute dream for you to have something like that where you could just have everything in one stop, mate, because those boys would be certainly, a 12-hour day. It'd probably become, 6 to 8, wouldn't it, mate?
Yeah, it would. And we've looked at a couple options, like even building a facility in North Queensland and having them fly up and back each week. But we looked at costing on that, and it's more affordable to have it there than the airlines go broke like Bonza, and suddenly cheap travel up and back each week becomes a massive expense. So then it doesn't work. So
don't get Jatz started on cheap airlines. The old Jetstar cost you last year, didn't
they? Yeah. And they've been around forever, and they still haven't got the fucking thing right.
Yeah. We got caught coming back from Canberra, and they got the Sydney flight to Gold Coast got stopped because of the lightning, and they put us on a flight on Monday morning. And the line on Monday morning was massive at the bagging lane. I had 2 kilos extra on my carry-on from Qantas. They put us on a Jetstar flight. They charged me $75.
Oh, you're kidding.
For the 2 kilos extra to carry on. And then said, yeah, it's not our problem. You'll have to claim it back off Qantas.
Oh, wow. What a nightmare.
Yeah.
This is the stuff I don't miss about going to the races anymore. It's just dealing with shit like this.
Yeah.
And so they cancelled the flights for the lightning and the storms, but it appears as though the ProMX at Canberra, they just kept running that with the weather. Heard an interview with Nathan Crawford, obviously one of your riders, and he wasn't too happy about it, mate. So how was that for a weekend in Canberra? Pretty wild weather-wise, a bit dangerous, would you say? You see at the, Pro Motocross a couple of weeks ago, they shut that moto down early with the threat coming in. So what was your take on how that was handled, mate?
Yeah, it's hard as a promoter, but I think a lot of the time they sort of get stuck. They, the weather forecast was supposed to be that it was minus something of a morning, and it turned out to be like 6 degrees. So it was much nicer in that regard. Then the storm was showing up about 2:00. They probably could have cut the lunch break and pushed it through. But because of the telecast, they hold it. And then the telecast is live, free to air. So I don't understand why they couldn't just play it an hour later. Do you mean they could have had both races done like in good weather and taken away the risk? But I don't know how the background of that works. I'm not a TV guy, so maybe there's too many complications. But they definitely need to think about it, not just in that part, but in all parts of rider safety. I think a lot of it goes, the rider's whinging, but they forget they're the main athletes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't think they get enough credit for that. Like they sort of, the rider's whinging about this or whinging about that. Well, hang on a sec, like if you go to another sport, they're treated like legends, like any runner that's doing it. They turn up at an event and they're treated like a legend. And if you're a motocross rider, you get treated like you're just there as part of the circus.
Yeah, no, that's it. They seem to just be worried about their bottom dollar more than anything, rather than looking at the main thing that's riders' safety in that aspect.
Yeah, the track turned out to be unreal at Canberra right before the race. Like, it's one of the best things. The Canberra club put in a massive effort. Everyone's a bit skeptical of it. It's a couple of years, it wasn't great there, but they had it. You couldn't got it any better for racing too. There's sort of 8 to 10 lines in most of the corners. It was real challenging. It was only that rain for the second moto, the 450s really that wrecked it. The 251 wasn't too bad, but the 451 was challenging as it was raining going on. And the up ramps looked like ice skating rinks.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that looked brutal. And actually, going off of what you said, Dave, because we did a little preview of it before the weekend, and I actually half felt bad because I was writing the place off completely before the weekend, and then I watched the first couple of motos, and I was like, man, I kind of feel bad from what I was saying, because they've turned it on. The track actually looks mint. Yeah, a lot of lines. Looked like it was made for good racing. It looked like there was a lot of parity. Like, outsides and insides like seemed to like work. So there was a lot of passing options. So yeah, hats off to the club because yeah, like the track itself was really good, and it looked like was it in reverse the couple of years ago when they raced there, or did they only do that this year?
Yeah, I questioned that as well because I thought those back tabletops went the opposite way.
Yeah.
But the boys said, no, I couldn't remember from the footage. So, the boys were watching it back. But yeah, I think it's been like that for a little bit.
Yeah.
But the corners were unreal. Like we'll walk the track walk with the crew, and we'll a little bit hesitant of some of the clumping that was coming up and stuff. Like there was some big clay clumps where they'd pick the rotary up and stuff. But
Yeah.
like that morning, they'd turned it all around, and the insides become that deep, that fast that the outside lines leveled up, which was a great way for racing. 3 guys could go into 3 different ruts and actually try and pass each other through the corner. Out of the backs, or just before those tabletops, out of the back section there was a tight left-hander, and then it went over a little single into a right-hander, and then some whoops up the hill.
Yeah.
That area there on the first lap was like 3 and 4 riders wide, and passes. They're passing through the left and then getting taken by 3 guys through the right.
Yeah.
Thinking they're moving forward, and then all of a sudden they're moving backwards.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And like it's tough for these clubs too, because it's not like America where like a lot of those tracks, especially the national tracks, they have races there all year round. So they're constantly preparing it. And a lot of them all of them are privately owned. So they got their own machines and like it's no volunteers or anything. They know what they're doing. And it gets tough like at these clubs where it's like, you get like a couple of randoms in really that are preparing the track for an Aussie national, and half the time like the track prep is like pretty ordinary. So yeah, hats off to those guys because yeah, they turned it on for this one.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that sort of come about over the last couple of years of discussion about the fact that there should be a track crew that's whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 people, whatever it is, going to the event a week before and actually jumping the machines with the club and managing them with their track prep. And so there's been a few hands sort of thrown up about that. I think that would be a big step forward. They do it with Supercross now, Pro Tracks builds most of the Supercross track rounds.
Yeah.
I think that would be sort of the next level forward if they could do that. That would sort of bring the safety up for the riders massively. And then, like Pro Tracks, he's approachable on the day too. If you talk to the promoter and say, hey, there's a jump on the Supercross track that needs fixing or this needs adjusting or whatever, if they had someone like that, they could probably be approachable as well to say, hey, that kicker in that jump's not safe for anybody. Let's fix it up, rather than talking with some of the officials that, can't see what's actually happening out on the track because they've got so much other stuff going on.
Yeah, that's interesting, mate. What's your take on the overall track speed in ProMX? There's always a lot of chat about it, but yeah, we've had Wonthaggi, Appen, Gilman, Traralgon, Warwick, and obviously Canberra, mate. Have you been happy with all of them? There's obviously, some people don't like them, some people like them, but it's a bit of a tough act to juggle, really, for the organisers getting the right tracks. And obviously, it'd be great to have some rounds over in WA, but it's just probably not really that feasible financially. You got to keep them all East Coast. But just your take on them, mate, and obviously good for the, a lot of riders and stuff, and yourself based in Queensland to finish the season at Toowoomba and QMP should be pretty good, mate. So your take on it all so far?
So most of the tracks have been quite good. Some of them aren't really raceable because I think they're designed by people that think it should flow. So when they're driving around in the buggy and the Bobcat and they're looking at how the tracks flow, they think it should flow straight away. So that's where Canberra was very different because of the multiple lines. So a lot of the tracks we see, the main line from the pro guys is probably, it's generally the fastest line on the track. To then try and find another line, there's not a lot of second options that can match it. So I think a lot of the racing this year is, been a little bit harder in that regard because the main line's been so fast. So for guys to come through the pack and stuff like that and catch some of the faster guys, it's been pretty hard work. But overall, again, it's hard without professionals, without a whole crew going around and adjusting these things. And then, like Jatz said, mostly volunteers, trying to keep the sport alive. But I think, it'd be interesting to see what tracks they have for 25. Warwick did a good job. I know Jaff helped a fair bit out there. He was out there a week before and a few days after cleaning up, raising the track back up and stuff like that. So it just depends. But WA is always a technical one because, the amount of guys doing the whole series because it's unaffordable makes it hard. But you're nearly better off charging every entry $10 more and freighting the Western Australians across rather than trying to take all the team's trucks across the Nullarbor,
Yeah.
or try and get set up like World Supercross where, okay, we can do it, but they're in crates and MA pay for the crates to fly.
Yeah.
And then you just pull out, you turn up at the track and the marquees are all laid out like the, MX GP, and you've just got a marquee to put your bikes in, build them, get them set. I think the cost just outweighs the reward right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I've been beating the drum for years about like having a race back over in WA. It's just because, like, especially nowadays, we got so many good riders coming out of WA, and the moto scene over there is just absolutely unreal. I mean, you see it every year when they have the Manjimup race, like the crowd that they get at that one. So yeah, to me, it'd be good to see him go back over there at some point. But yeah, like you said, like the financial cost to like get everyone over there, it's like, yeah, it's a bit of a challenge at the moment.
Yeah, I think a lot of the boys got pretty drained with that Manjimup travel as well.
Oh yeah.
Like,
yeah, it's not easy.
Nah, the middle of the season and it's winter and everyone's getting sick and then you're on planes more often.
Yeah.
I definitely think that schedule could, not for Manjimup in particular, but the ProMX schedule could look a little different to maybe put the colder rounds at the start of the year and the warmer climates at the end.
Yeah.
A little bit nicer. I think Toowoomba, we raced there a couple of weeks ago at Mountain Man. There was pretty interesting battles up there. They did a 3 10-minute moto format, and that kept the racing really, really tight between Nato and Cloudy and Reed Taylor and Kurt Gibbs and Caleb Burham. So there was some interesting stuff there. And then the 250 boys, Reed Taylor and Reese Budd battling just behind because those big 450s were drilling them off the start and up the hills. But I think Toowoomba is going to be a spectacle. It's such a good, the track's right in town. I don't think you're ever going to get that again. But, so people travel-wise, it's convenient. I think a lot of the time having the tracks too far out of town. Canberra was only 10 minutes out of town as well. But the track's too far out of town. People just don't have the time or the money to, spend a whole day at the track. They want to come, watch some action and go home. So, Toowoomba will be, I think it'll surprise a few people. Like the Matterhorn's getting faster and faster because they're not prepping it as deep. There's some other jumps there that, it's got some good jumps on Toowoomba now. So they're safe tabletops, but, another wall jump going up towards the Matterhorn as well that they got to jump out into the mud. So it makes it really technical. And then, great starts makes it fast. And then now they're not allowed to really rotary the first turn at Toowoomba. They've got to leave it hard pack and try and eliminate the problems. They go barreling down the second turn. So as in spectator wise, you can get to the inside of the track there for ProMX and stuff like that. So I think it'll be a really good event. And then they'll back it up with QMP. So QMP obviously join a couple of their tracks together there. And we do a fair bit of riding out at QMP. And they got track prep crew. I know Lawson Bopping's out there at the moment trying to piece it together as well. And, ex-pro rider. So he's, knows, you got to stick within the rules, but generally his track work is quite substantially better than most. So it should be a really good QMP national as well.
I was going to say, if Boppo's on the machines, you could bet he's going to be wanting to put some booters in out there. Maybe won't beat a regulation. That's the only thing.
Yeah. I think the other thing that the sport needs to change, though, is that, a ride park like QMP hosting around, it doesn't need to be the same track. Do you mean you got professional riders on there? So it should be a professional track. It doesn't need to, they can just tame it down afterwards.
Yeah.
But, the jumps build the spectators and rollers and stuff like that really turn it on for the racing, and they tend to sort of knock all that stuff out and make it faster. I think they need to make sure the technical side of it's there. So it should be interesting to see what Boppo puts in at QMP.
Yeah, because that was like because we would ride it like when I was living in America, when we go to Glen Helen and those places during the week, like it was obviously fairly tamed. And then as soon as they have the nationals there, like they just ramp the place up like crazy. Sometimes they'd go like way overboard, and it was borderline like being on a supercross track. Yeah. So, and yeah, like you were saying, like, yeah, it doesn't have to be the same track that like they have during the week. Like, yeah, just change it, make it gnarly for when the nationals come into town and then just change it back.
Yeah. I think the inclusion of the 65 class and the younger kids and stuff like that sometimes I think takes them a little bit away from that. But I think it's encouraging, like the tracks in Australia are basic compared to what these kids are racing in Loretta's and overseas at the world, junior titles and stuff. We have no jumps even similar to what they're jumping, Ryan Alexanderson just come back from Europe and he's unfortunately he's injured at the moment, but he's saying to me, Crawford, the jump that I crashed on looks nothing like what we jump over here. It's a 4-gear wide open tabletop in the sand. So he's saying you go to the track and you're hitting jumps wide open as fast as your bike will go. So, and there's nothing like that comparable here. So, to train and even the off season for them to then go back is really hard. So a young crew trying to go forward in the world scene, it makes it even harder for them unless they've got private, tracks. And, I guess, I know your situation, Jatz, when you were a kid, your old man was an enthusiast and the tracks that sorted for you are very different to what most kids were growing up on.
Oh, man, 100%. And then when we started going over to America, because, my tracks were pretty big back then, but even like racing on, the tracks I was racing growing up, like down south. And then I went over to America and I got to the first couple of tracks and I was just mind blown. I was like, you're kidding me. And I was on 85s and I was like, they expect us to jump this thing. And I was racing against some savages back then. And I was like, if I'm going to compete with them, I got to just jump this stuff. Like I had never, and I wasn't known as a jumper back in the day. And I was like, man, I've got to nut up and just hit this stuff because this is like just next level. And then when you come back, it's like we're racing on basically a pit bike track compared to what those kids are racing on over there. So they're a lot more used to doing that big stuff. And then once they get on the bigger bikes, it's no big deal. Whereas like over here, like it's tough for a kid, like a young kid going over to Europe and racing on those tracks or going over and racing the nationals or the futures in America. It's just totally different.
Yeah, I remember when we went to the States with Heath Fisher on an 85, we're running 3 teeth lower on the rear sprocket so he could try and hit this sort of step up triple thing, 4th gear wide open because any gearing taller he couldn't get 5th and it wouldn't make it.
Yeah. Oh, it's just, they're just on a completely different level over there. And in Europe too, they got the similar sort of tracks. They're a bit different, but they got a lot bigger jumps and that sort of thing. Whereas we're just kind of hamstrung over here with what we got.
Yeah, it makes it impressive with Kayden Minear. Obviously, you've trained him. He was part of your program for quite a while there, mate. And obviously, he did a couple of stints with the Orange Brigade with Daniel Blair before obviously making the step over to Star. And he's really impressed, obviously, last year as well as this year. Obviously, went 1-1 at the Hangtown Scouting Moto Combine SMX thing there. I did a podcast with him afterwards and he was saying, the tracks are just, so much different, not comparable. So he's obviously made that transition really well. Obviously sad to see him out injured at the moment, but held his own at that pro level for sure, didn't he, mate, with a couple of rounds there, doing really well before that thumb injury. But he was obviously racing pro in Australia a couple of years already and then going back to racing amateurs and then stepping up to the pro level in America. And the transition's been pretty seamless for him. He's handled that so well. So just give us your take on obviously Minear's trajectory. He's obviously had a lot of injuries in his young career already, mate, some nasty ones too, but so impressive to see one of your riders going over there and making waves on the world stage, isn't it?
Yeah, it was great. Kayden's a good kid and we watched over a sort of 18-month period here, his maturity changed. He went from being a kid to an adult and wanted to be a serious racer. And, I think one of the first steps was Supercross in 2023. First thing we tell you at Supercross is to land on the brakes. And then he seen a tough block on the track and grabbed a handful of throttle and then end up with a massive elbow industry out of Adelaide Supercross. So that sort of hindered him a bit. And then he come back and his grit, just grew from that. He was riding and training and people, he wasn't saying anything, but his elbow was going double the size after, the first 30-minute moto. And, he'd just back it down for the rest of the day and then go home and wait for it to calm down and then come back to the track the next day going, it's going to go again, but we'll just see how far we get with it, I think people don't understand the grit that he's got. And so, so he, obviously went over there and, he stepped back because I guess people don't really understand contract-wise over there. There's not a million seats for guys. So you got to prove yourself before you can get the seat. So, obviously going 1-1 in the combine, they started looking, going, oh, that's actually really unreal, and you've shown us your growth from last year, and then you got the opportunity to go pro, and I think he would have rather waited a little extra couple of weeks, but with a couple of injuries in the star team, they banged him up, and he was excited, and then after the first round, he was he rode good, but he was the best thing about him, he's disappointed. That was nowhere near where he wanted to finish, and so he went back to grinding and training even harder. And he just keeps going and going and going. He just, like, even with his thumb injury, it's not, oh, this happened, poor me, poor me. It's, oh, Crawford, we'll just get that fixed, and then we'll just wait the time, and then I'll start the physio, and then I'll be back on the bike, and then I'm going to try and race this race. Like, okay, man, there's no if, buts, or maybe. He's going back full time. He's doing whatever he can in the physio and the different therapies they've got in the States first over here as well. Red light therapy is massive over there at the moment, and cryovac, and like all the stuff that's not really obtainable here in Australia unless you've got massive funds behind it. Some of these facilities are now getting that sort of rehab materials at the facility, which is a massive growth thing. And he thinks he'll be ready for some SMX stuff. So we'll just have to wait and see if it heals fast enough for him.
Yeah, he strikes me as just a mentally tough dude, because I was actually there in 2023 at Adelaide when he had that accident, and I think it was his humerus that he ended up breaking.
Yeah, humerus and elbow,
just disintegrated the thing, and it was devastating to see. And I was hoping at that point in time, I'd seen him getting carted out. I was like, oh, I hope this isn't like a career-altering injury, just because the kid's so talented and he had a lot going for him. But man, to see him come back from that, and then he had a solid run in the Aussie Supercross season the next year. A lot of accidents like that would make someone gun shy after it. The confidence would be right down. But man, he just came back and just improved so much throughout that season. And now seeing what he's doing over there is just unreal. And just seeing that he just wants more and more, that's just awesome to see.
Yeah, it was interesting because during last year's Supercross series, he started out a little timid and he just kept working away at it. And the best thing about it, when he matured over that sort of year period, he changed as a racer, and you could just talk to him a little bit more like Aaron Tanny. We always call him the robot, because you can talk to him and he just does as you ask, and then he'll ask you why later. And Kayden started being like that, and he was just progressing forward and forward and forward. And the main thing that disappointed him out of that Supercross season was that last race where he got docked for jumping on the finish line. That really put a dent in him, and he didn't understand that, because none of it was, I guess, being able to see the flag behind a lapper and all that sort of stuff. But he didn't let it get him down. He just knew what the next path was, and started working towards that. So I think people underestimate how much he's got in the tank, and I think a few good months on the run and he'll be able to show them all over there and start making a name for himself and push himself up towards where a lot of other Aussies have got to, with Burner and Chad and all those sorts of guys, and now the Lawrence is doing it, but he'll be able to follow the path.
Yeah, it's going to be great to follow. Obviously, with that star framework, he obviously came back and did that Hangtown Moto Combine result after having the shoulder issue, which had complications too. So, mate, he's just an animal. Obviously, yeah, it'll be amazing to see what he can do when he builds some base of fitness and riding. And how's he coping with the star framework there, mate? Obviously, it's kind of a never settle, fiercely competitive, tough environment there where you're always racing against the clock and racing against your teammates. It sounds like an environment that he rise to the occasion. And it's cool seeing him and Cole Davies, an Aussie and a Kiwi, doing their thing over there and showing what they're worth, mate, and matching it with those American guys. And yes, how you reckon he's settling in there, mate? Seems like he's built for it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think settling in's okay for him. He just found that how much they want to push him on the practice track is a lot harder than over here previously what he's had to do. He tells me almost his sprint speed's not where he wants it to be, but he just doesn't believe pushing any harder in those track conditions is going to benefit him. So he kind of backs it back a little bit and finishes the moto strong, and a few other people around him, cartwheel, and but they seem to not be as happy with him because he finished the moto and didn't try as hard as the others. So, but it's definitely not work ethic. He'll do what's needed to win. He just is trying to juggle the intensity day in, day out, I guess, at the track there. So I talked to his mum and his dad a little bit, and they're trying to manage him and keep him level headed as well, because he's only still young, and backing up from a few injuries, he's got to try and level that out, and he just doesn't seem to think that the practice tracks where you try and show everyone how fast you are. He wants to wait till race day. So
Yeah, it's interesting. You got Cooper Webb for an example there. He's just an absolute gamer on race day, and you hear that he's not the absolute elite on the practice days because he's just managing it and he doesn't get too down by any, if he's getting beaten by his teammates. That's a really tough thing for him to manage and just really navigate how much intensity and how fast you're going to go every single day because the risk's high enough as it is, mate. And obviously you got pressure from the team to keep going faster or, there's consequences, I'm sure. So it's a tough balance. Obviously him and Webb are at very different stages of their career, but he's probably a pretty cool guy to follow because you hear he just manages the weeks and then he turns up on race day. So that's pretty cool that Kayden's got that approach already, even though the team mightn't like it that much.
yeah, I kind of try and work with him a little bit and spoke to most of my young kids. I say to them, you've got to listen to the words, not the tone. A lot of the time, I'm sure Jatz has gone through it when Pete was busy at work and then got you the practice track and the phone rings and trying to manage 10 things. And then, all of a sudden he's like, oh, you're fucking slow in that corner. It's not about that. It's just that he's frustrated from everything else going in the background. So listen to what the words are. You're slow in the corner. Go over and try and fix that, Not that he's pissed off about, someone's just cost him another $200,000 wrecking something at work.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's it. It's a fine line, yeah. But it's just all about, you just got to take the information in and then just try to improve on it and get the job done.
Yeah, tough. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Obviously, we'll see. We'll be watching his career with interest from Australia. Absolutely, mate. And obviously, with Australian Moto, there's so much to sort of get tucked into for the fans and obviously for the riders too. You got the AusX series, ProMX we've been talking about. We had some World Supercross rounds. There's one coming up in the Gold Coast, sadly clashing with the AusX series. You got MXGP and Darwin coming, the AusX Open with the Lawrence brothers and some other heavy hitters. So it's a pretty cool time for the riders and the fans in the sport right now. It's going in an upward trajectory, would you say, mate?
Yeah, it's going forward massively. But the other one you got in there is Australian Junior Motocross titles in Gilman. So it's the week after the MXGP in Darwin. So we're trying to get our amateur program sorted because, again, they've got to try and back it up. So they're going to go from, finishing the series here in the Sunshine State Series next weekend to on the, I think it's 18th, 19th, and 20th in Rocky. They're doing that. And then they're trying to, do a couple of months and then up to Darwin. So that's a 3-4 day drive and then turn around and drive another 3 days south to be in a week in South Australia and then turn around and drive home ready for round one of the Supercross series in Queensland.
Man,
crazy, mate.
Clocking up some serious K's.
Yeah. So we're trying to juggle, like we've got one van going this way and they're taking a spare person's bike and then their other van's going the other way, going to South Australia, and they're going to fly in between and then there's Supercross bikes at home waiting for him. So as soon as they finish in Adelaide, they're flying the kid home so he can jump on his Supercross bike and practice before everyone gets home and try and back it up.
Oh,
the schedule is not great, that's for sure.
Nah, definitely not. And I've talked about this with Ed before, especially like for the Supercross season, because I mean, it's only like a short period of time that the boys race Supercross, but I feel like there's nowhere near enough time from the end of motocross to the start of Supercross, especially for these guys. And it's tough to get on tracks and stuff too now, but it's hard, especially for the young guys coming up, Nate. I'd like to hear what you think on this. Is like the gap's just not big enough, to get the boys ready to be able to compete on a full-blown Supercross track at full speed in that time. And either we got to get the races closer during motocross so it's not so spread out during the season, and then you have a bit more of a gap so the guys can actually prepare for Supercross and get comfortable on it.
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest thing is once they're seasoned riders, they get past that sort of 21 bracket, it's probably not as critical.
Yeah.
All your up and coming 85 kids, MX3 kids, stuff like that. But the main thing I see that comes along with that is the parents' budgets. So the people that are suffering are the ones that aren't professional at it yet. And, the cost of it, how do they expect parents to be able to, mum's driving the van down, dad's flying down after work on Friday afternoon, to turn around and mum's driving the van home and dad's driving or vice versa, to try and make it work. And then, I seen a young kid from New South Wales, they've sold their house and they've got a year on the road, and mum's working remotely from her caravan at the track.
Man.
And they're having a crack, and they're doing quite well with it. They're not really in their own sort of realm, but that's a big stab for a whole family to have a crack at. And I just don't think the people higher up are looking at the development of the riders. All they're looking at is what schedule do we need to put these, how do we fit these 20 races into 52 weeks and not put them at Christmas time.
Yeah.
Other than that, I know they got to hire the stadiums, and there's some things around that sort of stuff, but
yeah,
it needs to be a massive shuffle, and they need to look at it, like even dragging 65 kids to Canberra last weekend, then you're going to turn around and drag them to QMP, in 4 weeks time. How is that even viable for a parent, and then you're going to turn around and drive them 4 weeks later, you're going to drag them to South Australia. So
yeah.
I think,
man, that is nuts. Like, that's way gnarlier than what I ever did back in the day. Like, racing, like, we were only just racing in Queensland, and then end of the year you'd be going away to the Aussies, and that was it. But now, like, it just seems like, man, like the travel that the young kids have got to do nowadays is just next level.
Yeah, and that's some of the things that I come against is, I remember when some of the riders used to, the Aussie juniors would finish in September, and the junior riders were pretty much finished. They'd have a 2 to 3 month break and then start their preseason. So their bodies got to recover, injuries got to recover, all that sort of stuff got to be better. And now, they're not getting that recovery. They're finishing Supercross, the last weekend in November. So then they'll have 3 weeks off Christmas. They'll start their preseason the first week of January, if not earlier. So they're not even getting 4 weeks of recovery in their body, so the only recovery time they ever get is when they're injured.
Yeah.
So that's not really a feasible thing. And then you're saying, like a 100-meter sprinter doesn't perform, every second weekend at an Olympic Games. And you're asking these kids to be able to do that. And they're wondering why the sport burns out. But then the financial commitment from the parents, stops some really good riders being able to go forward. So, it's no fault of their own. They just don't have the funds to be able to do it.
Yeah, shoot. Man, that is wild, because I just remember thinking back to, like, when I was doing the junior Aussies, like, it was that, last weekend in September, and then I don't think I'd even touch a bike until January. So, like, there was, like, little to no chance of burnout over that time. I wasn't doing Supercross and all these other races. I mean, geez, these kids must just be going all year round nowadays.
Yeah, you got to go and play at the dam for a month and stuff.
Yeah. I was flat out on the Xbox for a couple of months and skiing. That was the off season.
Yeah.
That's good stuff.
I just don't understand how they're going to get progression forward and continue the sport to grow if they're burning the passionate ones out early.
Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah, it's certainly a big ask, mate. It's well said. It's some great insight into it. And, in other countries, like you look at France, obviously, they've got a really excellent youth, development program. Obviously, they won, the overall, the Junior World Championships on the weekend. And they, have like an academy style thing, for the kids. Obviously, it helps, fund things as well as like integrate everything. And so it's all, pretty streamlined. And obviously, Australia's a massive country, and it's probably pretty hard to do something like that, to have like an academy. And a lot of these motorsports type things, they don't get the government funding at all because they're not, perceived as necessarily needing to have it, so that's also another issue, funding for these kind of things and where it comes from. But there definitely should be some sort of a framework or a pathway or something to sort of make what you're saying into a reality, or at least bridge the gap a bit more.
Yeah, and I seen Hayden Melross on the weekend, and I was having a chat with him because he's coming back for Supercross, and I was talking to him. They've actually employed his services to go to Tasmania for the last few months, for 2 and 3 days at a time, to take the kids that are going to the MXGP in Darwin from Tasmania. He's been down coaching them, trying to set them a program and actually show them what's needed to be at that level.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and I was like, that's great. I wonder why that's not in every single state.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, it's been just driven off Motorcycling Tasmania's, a couple of people at the top there, and they've just made it all happen. So I don't see how that framework wouldn't have been thought of and passed through, through every state.
Mm.
So,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, that's a good program that they got going there, and getting an experienced pro with years of like knowledge to groom some young fellas. Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah, and as you know, Jatz, he's got stateside experience as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
he knows what the difference in the levels are, the difference in the tracks. So yeah, I thought it was a great idea, and I was just wondering, how they're going to bring that sort of stuff forward and who's in charge of development, because a lot of people with name tags on that aren't developing much for the sport.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
Yeah, mate. You've obviously got a really good crew that you work with every day, and they obviously train younger riders too. A lot of your riders on your program, like Barham, all these lads, he's a particularly integral part of that. But just give us you got Todd Waters came on board on the program. Was it last year, I believe? And yeah, it must be pretty cool having him, especially for the younger riders. He's so enthusiastic still. He must be a top asset to the crew, imparts so much knowledge and, just on the mental side as well as the physical side. And his attitude's brilliant too. So certainly gives them a good appreciation of what you can achieve in the sport and obviously how important it is to put the work in and you can achieve great things. And so just give us a little bit of words on Todd's influence. And he's obviously going to race again next year from all reports too, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, Todd's got a fair bit of juggling going on. No, when he comes to the track, he makes a full day of it, and quite often he'll be finishing some moto stuff after we've finished training, and I'll have our amateur crew, or Caleb Barham will have our amateur crew there, and he's more than happy to stop and give him a few pointers and talk to him about how to get better and why you need coaching and stuff. So he's been really good about that, and he's just, I don't know, he's a top guy with too much on his plate, really. He does a massive juggle. It was really good to see at Canberra. He put in a solid first moto and then a really strong second moto in the water. When it was raining, he just goes to enduro mode and sort of started stepping it up. It's no real different to him. It's probably one of his best attributes is when he comes to the track. If it's good, bad, or indifferent, he's like, oh, way better than having a real job.
Yeah.
So he sort of, everyone else sooks about stuff and he doesn't sook about anything. He just gets out there and has a go. And he's been doing a lot with his own bike setup this year, so he's trying to get that dialed, and that's taken some time and effort from him and his team, and sort of got his T-Dub line going, and he's helping the Des Nations guys with printing the T-shirts and caps and all this sort of stuff as well. So he's definitely got a full plate that he tries to have a go at a lot of things.
Oh man, I mean, he is just an absolute workhorse. I remember, I think it was probably the last time I seen him at the 2023 AusX Open. I was talking to him in there. I think he just had his collarbone done, and we were talking in the pits there, and I was asking him how many years he was gonna keep going for it. He's like, "Oh man, I'm going till I'm at least 40, at least." And then he asked me that same question, and I was like, man, I think tonight's it. This is the last one of hanging the boots up and not setting eyes on another bike again. So, yeah, just for all he's done over the years, and like to see him just still have that fire in him to get out and do it, because it's not easy to do it even as a young buck. I mean, and he's like getting into his late 30s and still putting in the work. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, he's not scared of doing the work. He's just trying to find time to do it is the biggest thing.
Mm.
He's got the family as well, so the kids, and he's interesting. He's got so much passion towards being a dad as well, and he's trying to juggle that stuff. It's even funny on race days. He'll be in the truck, with the girls setting up the iPad and talking to them about what they're watching and stuff like that. Between most motos, and most of the other riders are sitting there just in their own little world thinking about what he's doing, and he's just making sure he doesn't miss out on any steps of the life of the girls. So. He definitely puts in the effort in every angle. So,
Yeah, what a legend, mate. His teammate, Regan Duffy. It's good to have him back on your program as well, mate, even though he's going through a torrid injury that he suffered at Manjimup at the moment, mate. But yeah, awesome to see him back out there. He's a top lad, and obviously having Todd and him at the track must be also great for the youngsters. But yeah, pretty inspirational that he's still racing and still just, that's what he wants to do. And he loves racing, doesn't he, mate? So credit to him. And how's he going, mate? Do we expect to see him back at some point this year, or will it be a 2026 for his return?
yeah, I'm not sure that you'll see him back this year. He's still in a little bit of pain each week. He says it's getting better. He's funny character. He's still not done. come over this year, and he was struggling at the start of the year with a lot of stuff, and then we started working on some mental side stuff to try and really bring him forward. And Traralgon, sort of stepped it up, and then obviously went across to WA the week later and was back at home and a bit more comfortable with everything and going really quick. And then obviously the incident where he's hit the bump and his hands come off, and it's just turned super ugly for him real quick again. It's put a big dent in his approach to stuff, but he's a hard guy. I don't think it's hard to hang up the boots when there's still more left. Like when you're content with what you've done, it's quite easy. But when you're not finished, it's a hard line to not want to come back. So my personal prediction is he'll be back. I don't see that he's done yet. I don't see that he's reached where he wants to be. So he'll get some other health stuff sorted as well, and I think you'll see him back again for another crack.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I'd imagine it's got to be so tough for him, especially like having that accident all those couple of years ago now, especially like being so young, and his career was just on an absolute like rocket ship. Like he was leading the 450 championship at one point, and then just to have that happen, and then the mental battles he must be dealing with just must be tough and then having like injury after injury, it must be tough for him.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that a lot of people forget is like, when you're living away from home, and there's not someone there helping you doing the washing, there's not someone there helping you do the cooking, there's not someone there, going to the grocery shop for you, while you're out riding. It makes a proper load, I guess. And I think that's what a few of them are struggling with at the start of the season this year is, we're driving quite a number of kilometers to the track, and then it'd rain and we'd drive to another track, and we're shuffling around everywhere, and then they haven't done their laundry from the week before, and then there's nothing in the fridge, and then all those sorts of elements. So I think Regan was he got on top of all that sort of stuff, and he really enjoyed his running down here on the coast, and he started getting into that, and he was progressing forward in mile an hour. And I just wish we could have seen what would have happened without that crash at Manji. I think you would have seen a very different Regan Duffy towards the end of the season, and would have put his confidence back where it needed to be.
Yeah, mate. Definitely everyone in the moto world just wishes him all the best because, he's a top bloke and just a super talented rider as well. And some of the other blokes on your crew, obviously Caleb Barham, Jatz and I did a pod with him a few months back. Just a great bloke, one of the best blokes in Aussie Moto as well. So he obviously helps you run your program a lot, and he's getting to grips with that Kawasaki more and more and getting some good results on the weekend. Expect him to have another great ride at Toowoomba as well, mate, because he's pretty damn fast around that track. He showed it last year, one of the few blokes to genuinely battle Brody Connolly. And so, big weekend at Toowoomba coming up for him too.
Yeah, KJ's good. His wrist from World Supercross last year is been probably the worst niggling thing that we've had to deal with. It seems like it's coming good, and then one jar of it, and it's another 2 weeks before he can really ride again and stuff like that. So it's just an ongoing issue that we can't seem to get over the top of. We can't find a solution for it. He doesn't run a wrist guard or anything, but he thinks he's back to full fitness. And then he did Toowoomba Mountain Man the other day on the 450 and didn't have anything problems. And then a day or so after the race, it just swells, and then all of a sudden he can't use the throttle for another 3-4 days, and then so he's off the bike. And then down there on the weekend, he was telling me that because the ruts are so deep, you can't see the holes in the bottom. And so he's sort of feeling them out, so he didn't know when to brace to hold his wrist, and when he didn't know when to brace. So he said he's pretty hesitant the first couple of laps of the races, and that cost him a fair bit. But I think you'll see a difference in the next couple of rounds. Toowoomba, he finished third at Mountain Man behind NATO and Cloudy and stuff like that on a 450 that he borrowed off his mate when put his 250 suspension in. So even Gibbsy was like, "Oh, I thought you're on," because he had his 250 number plates on it. He's like, "I couldn't understand how you're just drilling me out of the turns." He goes, because there's stock pipe on it and everything. And then Gibbsy's like, and then I realized you're on a 450, not your 250, because of the backgrounds weren't any different. So, but yeah, he rode really good up there. And so going into Toowoomba, being at home, sleeping in your own bed, it makes a massive difference. So I think he'll come out cracking there. And I was trying to convince him to do both classes, but he's like, "Oh, I don't know." And I'm like, "It's around Toowoomba, man. It's like a club day. You'll be fine."
Yeah. He's done that many laps around the joint. So, yeah, I mean, bike fitness won't be an issue around that thing. He'd just be on cruise control around there.
Yeah, but he wasn't quite sure that his wrist would hold up, so we'll play it by ear and see what we can get out of him.
Man, it always used to blow my mind when Hamish Hardwood was out here doing 2 classes every weekend, and then would just be like just using the like 450 race as a bit of an extra look at the track because he didn't get to ride during the week. Then he'd just come out in the lights class and we'd just be duking it out. I was like, how does this guy have the gas tank do this every round?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the interesting part, like when you're a racer and the other guy's double classing and then you're battling with him, you're like, surely I've got more energy than that guy.
Yeah.
Surely.
I'm like, how is this fella going around me at the end of the moto? He must be running on empty.
Oh,
Yeah.
he's a weapon, eh? I remember that last one at Coolum. I remember watching that at the event and he got a top 5 in MX1. And then I believe the same, maybe the year after or that year, he'd done the Nations, then he'd done the Washougal Pro Motocross, and he's working a full-time construction job in New Zealand. And yeah, it's crazy how blokes like that make it work and still have it in the tank, mate.
Oh, well, that was the reason why he did it, I found out, because I believe he's a chippy. And he would just work 5 days a week, no riding, and then would just come out and he's like, yeah, I use the 450 as like my practice. And then 250, I go balls to the wall. And I was just like, man, this guy is just built different.
No, you got to respect it, that's for sure. And a couple other blokes on your crew, mate. Obviously, Nathan Crawford, he's really making some good strides. He's had some ups and downs with the bike, and the results haven't been where he wants because he's a winner and he wants to, put his best foot forward, has high expectations. He wants to be more in that battle with Beaton and Webster, and they're at an absolutely phenomenal level, and so is he, mate. And obviously, some words on Reese Bart, a lot going on with the team change. He's had a lot of adversity, there's been unlucky crashes. He's obviously still putting in the work in and still wants to, get the best results, work towards that podium, mate. So a few words on them as well.
Yeah, Nato's shown he's a title contender. He just we started a little bit behind in the new bike setup and bit of team structure changes and stuff like that. So he went to be able to go back to his own suspension guy with Kenny at factory spec. So it just took him a couple of rounds to really get on top of it. And then the last couple of weeks his mental game's changed and he's wanting to win the motos. And he showed in the first moto on the weekend that his second place was no fluke. It's there. He's just got to Jed is just on that next level again. Jed's bike setup, you watch it, it's amazing. He rides with the bike. We have a lot of credit for Jed. He's a world-class dude that's racing in Australia, but he knows when the bike's handling well as well. We watch the changes that the CDR team make and make him feel more comfortable. He normally goes faster again in the second moto. Like if you go and look at the lap chart, he's just that guy. So so NATO's been chasing them down and working hard towards that. And he's a workhorse. He's never happy with second. So he's a bit disappointed at the moment that he hasn't been able to get any moto wins, but I wouldn't count him out over the next couple of weeks. He'll put it on all the way to the end. So,
yeah, he seems like he's closing that gap towards Jed, getting closer and closer. Because right now Jed's just on another level. He looks like he's completely in sync with everything. So, but he's creeping up on him, man. He looks like he's made some real improvements since the start of the season, and moto win is right there for him, I reckon.
Yeah, that's what he's working towards. So it should be pretty good. And then, moving into Supercross, he'll just have a bit more confidence going into it and we'll get that started. So I think he's going to do the GP as well. So he's got to try and run the motocross program and the Supercross program side by side. And so we're doing not 40-minute motos around the Supercross track, but he's going to be, might be some days where he starts doing Supercross in the morning and he's out doing motocross in the afternoon.
Yeah, might have to start training in an oven too, because September in Darwin, I'd imagine, would not be frosty, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of things that people forget about, They're not going to know what's about hydration stuff, but we have, with Fighting Fit at Dean, we have, sweat protocols and stuff like that, so they can map at what temperature, so they can go in a controlled room, put him on a spin bike, see what's, sodium, potassium, what he's losing and stuff like that. So they can resupplement and go back the opposite way and make sure they're in front before they do that. So we got some good testing stuff in that regard. It's, not, I guess, publicized that much, but boys at Fighting Fit, if you want to look for that extra edge, you can find it. It's just how deep you want to go. So, that's the other thing is just making sure that your energy level, because it's fine to be matching their speed, but you've then got to match it for 40 plus 2, That's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it's another great aspect of the program you're running, mate. And I remember there was some pretty good takeaways from talking to you. Obviously, some of your guys are privateers as well, and obviously they're juggling a full-time job. And you obviously try to help them, put all those eggs in one basket to make it happen, mate. Because it's not easy to make a living off motocross and be a professional, especially in Australia. And you're just trying to maximize, all the work that's done and identify any weaknesses in their programs and structures and how you can fix it. And I remember one, with a lot of young kids of today, you see with the phone scrolling and just the mind's still active and they're not actually resting and the phone time's through the roof. And, you want them to try and learn as much about the bike as possible so they can have a deeper understanding with their testing and the bike work and just a feeling with everything, just so they know how things work to get an understanding. So I think with listening back to it, I believe it was they're not evolving, they're just existing was your quote, mate. So just give us a little bit about that, mate, because it's you got to sort of go pretty all in to be a pro athlete, don't you, mate? So cool to have that structure on and off the bike for these dudes, and you just want to make them better people as well as better riders too, don't you?
Yeah, we've had this conversation actually with a couple of younger MX3 kids and MX2. So Seth Shackleton runs in our program, and we've been working with like really hard with him over the last few weeks because he wants to win, and he's sort of sitting in that third, fourth place, and he's not happy with it, and he wants more, and he's willing to put in more. So sort of said to him accountability about, I think of it when they finish riding of the day, back in the day there was no phone, right? So you finished riding, you hopped in your van, you got your lunch. You ate your lunch while you were driving home. You washed your bike, and all you thought about the whole time was, what do I do today? What do I need to be better at? What's tomorrow got for me? Where are we riding? What do I need to be planned for? And then it was off to the gym. Where now they come in from a moto and they're finished for the day, and they pick up their phone and go, "Oh, look at that cool thing on TikTok or Instagram," or I've got 7 Snapchats from this chick, and I better get back to this, and their distraction is gone straight away. Their accountability for like they don't download the day. So we've put into Seth's program. He's got Seth and Heath Groundwater have got a thing we tried with them last week where they've got a 30-minute download each night. So they've got to go somewhere, no TV, no phones, no nothing for 30 minutes, no anything, and they've got to sit there and just process their own thoughts for the day. And try and make sure that they're, able to download the day and understand what's needed for tomorrow and are they ready? What is it they want? I quite often send them a heap of memes on stuff like that. Like there was one that come out of the States where they were showing that if you're on their phone time 1 hour before the football game over there was a 20% decline in performance of the athletes.
Wow.
So they're saying their motivation and their thought patterns of how they're going to play the plays and do everything, the mistake rate was 20% worse.
Wow.
Yeah.
Shoot.
So they've got a rule where, 1 hour before the game, there's no interaction with anything.
Yeah.
Most of the people think you're, cutting limbs off, but, I try and explain it to them that, the funding, like, Seth's moved from WA, so he understands it, right? But, he still doesn't quite get what it costs for him to be here. His mum and dad work tirelessly. He's got Haas as a sponsor that's helping as much as they can and stuff like that. But, and Seth's a great kid. He doesn't, do anything bad, but he's got to realize that, what's the next thing that's going to get me to the next part of the performance I need? And, he's not massive on screen time. Like we've had riders that are 6 hours a day and shit like that, which is ridiculous. And, I tell them, if you got 6 hours, man, you should have a job.
Yeah. Man, they're almost putting in a full workday on the phone.
Yeah. So most of that stuff stopped this year. Like, Reese Budd's been a good, example of that. He's sort of come across from a couple of different trainers and, the kid's got heart, like a lot of people say to me, oh, he sort of gives up and stuff like that. He doesn't ever give up. He just gets, that disappointed in what's going on. He sort of backs it back from that. So we've been working hard with Reese the last few weeks and making sure that he was on. And it was so disappointing to watch him, after the team changes and stuff like that. He's, really gelled with Kawasaki and enjoying that. And then on the weekend, he gets a good start. He's running, with Connolly and then goes into the turn and the forks dig in, the bottom lugs on the forks and just cartwheels, like gets up, no rear guard, no front peak, broken levers. And, anyone else in that regard would have rode around to the park from my area, kind of gone, oh, my season's not going to plan and I just had another big one, I'll pack it up, Reese just got back out and went, righto, kick this straight, get this done. I'm going to do the moto anyway. So he rode through that moto, and then the next one he come out and he was a bit beat up, and he got into sixth place and sort of just settled there because he couldn't really push too far forward with the track conditions. But he's got a good heart on him, and he works hard, and he's got a young family, and he's trying to juggle that, and it's a massive effort for that sort of thing. So his wife's trying to support him and support their family as well. So she's working there, he's working away at riding, and then they got a kid to manage, and home, and all these things, and then you get unfortunately the salary in Australia is not anywhere near the reward that it needs to be. So you've got to try and find outside sponsors, and then the economy's slowing, so then the outside sponsors are slow paying, and then and they're just people helping you, so you can't really say too much. But everyone's sort of starting to slow up in that regard. So I think if people want to go forward, they're going to have to be smarter about what they do. They're going to have to show that they're not on their phones. They're going to have to show that they're being at the gym. They're going to have to, social media, as much as I hate it, they're going to have to be better at their social media presence. We have a couple of riders that work flat out and do heaps of stuff, and then don't post anything on socials, so no one even knows about them. So we've actually got a day tomorrow out at QMP. They have a 3-day camp for the kids, learning to ride and stuff, that one of my mates, Rod Jenner, hosts out there. So we've decided we're going out with the pro crew tomorrow, and we're going to moto in the morning and do our training, and then at lunchtime we're going to set up a tent and have a question and answer time for the 50 participants in their 3-day thing. So try and get some more fans orientated about ProMX, and the local guys that actually ride that they'd never see because they don't go to the track on the weekends. Try and get them to interact and get those 50 participants and their family out to the ProMX, and try and add an extra couple hundred people.
Man, that is awesome. Actually, one question I wanted to ask you, Nate, especially because you've been in the sport for a lot of years, and coaching for a lot of years. What's the biggest change you reckon that's happened? What's the biggest change in the sport? In terms of is it more recovery stuff? Mainly with the pro guys, is it recovery? Is it the way the guys train off the bike, or is it a mental aspect or that sort of thing? What do you reckon's been the biggest change over the last, I don't know, 10 years or so?
I'd say, from when I started coaching 20 years ago, there's a lot of stuff. I remember being up at your place and helping you and Toddy and a few of the, Wade Hunter and a few of the boys up there on 65s, the Evans brothers on 65 and 85 and that. When I was still riding full time. But, I guess back then, the seriousness of the races was not that big. More of them, there's less pros and less funding and stuff like that. So a lot of them were working more often. I guess now it's seen that, the off-bike programs, I guess, 40% of your stuff, and the on-bike 60%, where it used to be believed that if you were doing the on-bike, it was 90% of your program.
Absolutely.
So I think now they're finding that and, the old school mentality was that, if you did 3 30-minute motos and, or, even one of the older ones is get your 2-stroke and fill it up to the top and ride till it runs out, push your bike, then have something to eat and a drink and do it again. They've sort of, we know now from the way the body performs that that's not that beneficial. So you're trying to catch people, not only do you need to be different, but you need to be stronger. And, one of the main things we've learnt with a lot of our riders is people think that, they're strong enough to ride a dirt bike, but when they get 15 minutes in, the strength's the first thing that goes away. And as soon as strength goes away, you don't feel as though you can grip the bike as well. Well, then you dial out of the throttle. So where before it was believed it was all cardio. It's not cardio hanging on to a 450 wide open. So I guess that's a lot of the changeover as well, is it's more gym based than cardio based. I know a couple of riders that I have in Europe, they're telling me, oh no, they still, they don't go to the gym over here. They still cycle, 50 kilometers a morning, and they go riding during the day and do 3 40-minute motos and go back. And I just think, well, I guess it works to an extent, but they're that far behind in what's going on in America and over here and in other parts of the world, that I don't see that that's still the basis of how they're trying to find their biggest performance. I don't. And one of the probably main things that we're working out and I'm trying to teach to them that we're learning is flexibility. I guess is how much energy is drained from not being flexible enough. So your muscles have to fire harder. Everything takes more effort in that regard. So you're actually not energy efficient. So we've made sure that we're trying to step up our stretching program and limber program as well. So just adding more elements like that. And you can see straight away as soon as they get to the track who's warmed up before they get to the track. You can see who's ready to go. You can see, we had a test with Fighting Fit the other day. It was they didn't know, so they show up to the track and Dean turns up with aero bikes and skipping ropes and bands and stuff for a warm-up routine, and then goes, right, I go and get your lunch and your food that you bought for the day and come and put it on the table here. And the snacks come out and he's like, well, where's your actual lunch? Oh, we're just gonna stop at Nando's on the way home, or we were just gonna go to Subway or whatever it was after we finish riding. And he's like, well, that's why your results are where they are. You're not performing the second moto because you don't have the energy. So that was an interesting one. And so I think overall, just every aspect's come up, but the main one would have to be that, just riding your dirt bike's not enough.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Oh, because I think about like seeing what everyone's doing nowadays, and like, especially with like track and recovery and all that. I wish I had some of this stuff back when I was younger, so I could show Pete what I was dealing with back then. Because back then it was more is better, and it was go down again.
Yep.
And there'd be days like you'd be thrug as a dog, could barely get out of bed, and his response would be, well, sometimes you're not going to be 100% on race day, so you just got to deal with it.
Oh, don't worry. I used to get the phone calls from your dad. I used to love them.
Oh, yeah. Don't worry. And he could spin a good story on one.
Yeah.
Like he'd add a bit of extra seasoning on top of the story, that's for sure. He could do that.
Yeah. I remember when he had you training for the 1 minute long sand track in the river.
Oh,
the
man.
WA Nationals.
Oh, I never
wanted
to see another sand track after that.
Pete rings me and says, he's complaining about the track being too short and he's done too many laps. He's like, is there such thing as too many laps? I'm like, nah, never, Pete.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He had me like, put it this way. We talked about burnout with the young kids and the races nowadays. He would put me on the brink of burnout before the junior Aussies every year. Like it was 7 days a week, after school, every day, hot as balls on that sand track. I tell you what, it got me good in the sand though. I'll give that to him. But oh man, the amount of blood, sweat, and tears I left on that 18-second sand track is unfathomable.
It's so good. I reckon it was a particularly excellent comment you made about the mistakes, with the ball sports, and if you miss a shot or drop a catch, the consequences aren't so severe. But in motocross, if you lose that 20% of concentration, it can be pretty severe. A lot of injuries. The risk's already massive. So that was a pretty good takeaway there, mate. And a couple more before we let you go. Mentioning last time just about some of the techniques you particularly admire in the world of motocross. Obviously, Jet and Hunter, you see what they do, but you were sort of leaning towards more Hunter being the benchmark just in terms of proficiency and how solid he is just in all areas and balanced and that kind of thing. Jay Coop as well. It's pretty cool in motocross. You can be efficient in many different ways. You look at Deegan, he's obviously, much more bulldog style, but he's also making refinements. But you were sort of mentioning just if you have that better base technique, there's so much more scope to go faster. Whereas someone like Deegan, if you ride like that, the scope is just not as high. You're sort of on the limit more or less. So pretty cool, all that stuff, mate. What's some of the stuff that you're still really enjoying in the world of moto? And the Lawrence brothers certainly setting the bar high, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely. Lawrence brothers are, Jet, I think Jet has, a slightly unique style to a few of them. I think Hunter still, to me, he's still one of my favorites. Him and Justin Cooper, they just seem to be that efficient on the bike. They get the job done, and I reckon Cooper's got a lot more development in him. I reckon he's going to come on fire, and next, he shows it for a few laps there, and then goes back a little bit, but he's going to actually surprise a few people because I think he's got one of the better techniques out there. I think a lot of people, and even just over here, they're rushing to be like that. So I hear it all the time. Jet stands like this, so that's how you need to stand when you see a kid on a Divi 250 at the track and his dad's helping him out. And I'm thinking to myself, that kid can't even come into the corner and lead with his leg, and you're trying to tell him to shuffle his foot back off the rear brake and make sure he's weighting the outside peg before he starts on the throttle, And so we quite often get that. And I think Instagram and stuff is the worst part of that, because people think, oh, I've got a great coach, he's on Instagram and he's got 5,000 people like his stories,
Oh no. Oh no.
And so they're looking for that, they're spending so much money racing, they're looking at that free advice, and they find this free advice on the internet on someone's story and think, this is the perfect thing to do, And, like, I just think, it's just not there. Like, I can give you an example. Last night, Nato and I were chatting, and then, we're having a conversation about some stuff and about how he needs to improve and where he needs to improve on the track. And then I actually took a clip off Jed's story and screenshotted it and, broke it down into segments and texted to Nato and said, have a look. Like, you're not silly. You'll see what's going on different here. And, he writes back, yeah, I understand, what do we need to do? And, works back that way where, that's where it's an asset. But when you're just getting on there and, someone's telling you that, oh, this guy's a pro and he goes through the rollers doing this. And, next minute you see Johnny going up the start straight at, QMP with his, flapping off the back of the thing because he thought that was the fastest way around the track. So, yeah, I think those guys are doing it. They showed some clips the other day. You see the ones where Eli Tomac and comparing Tomac and Jet. Look at how fast Tomac's going. He's got more of an older school style and, he's still there and it's got him to that point in his career. So I kind of think, a lot of the time, unless there's a dedicated reason, and that's what I always ask my guys, like, why are you doing that? What's created this? Is it laziness? Is it energy efficiency? Is it because you're trying to do something different? Or, one of the bigger ones is, they all watch some stuff where people sit down real early for the turns and set up for it. And I'm like, okay, that's great. So what happens when, what you're watching, there's a rough track, sit down and bounce through the braking bumps, at Rocky in 2 weeks' time? I don't think so. So they just don't have a thought pattern going forward of why they're doing something. And, with this year, we haven't had the luxury of some of the roughest tracks, but I say to the boys, you come out of the turn, you need to get to your feet as soon as the bike's straight so that it's got the lower center of gravity and it's driving forward. And you need to do it not for any other reason, but so that you're fittest on the track. You're doing the work that's required so that if you go to a rough track, you can use that same amount of energy. So I think there's some big things that are sort of coming out around energy efficiency with the off-bike training and all that sort of stuff coming into your technique and what is energy efficient, what's not. Like, I know feet on the pegs is, got its place, but, at where and what riding style, at what level do you introduce that sort of stuff? I watch a bunch of kids ride around where their feet are on the pegs, but they're not leaning the bike over into the rut because they're scared their foot's going to touch. Got a flat corner and with both feet on. So I think, you'd see it, Jatz, in stuff you watch and even stuff when you comment and put it up, I'm looking at a different perspective and watching the technique, and I'm sure you don't miss it. You just, making something funnier. That's all.
Oh yeah, nah. Oh, that's it. And like, yeah, I've said it on here before where it's like not one style for someone like is the best. Whereas like, yeah, like you were talking about with Jet and Tomac, like two completely different ways that they're riding the bike, but they can go around the track at the same pace, And like, I always like to use Carmichael as an example. Ricky, greatest to ever do it. He did not have a style that you watch and go, wow, that looks pretty. It was wild. It was sometimes erratic, but I mean, he made it work. Like, so there's not one way to do it. You just got to figure out what works best for you. And it's definitely not going on Instagram, because I have seen nowadays there's a couple clowns getting out there that I've absolutely never heard of in my life that are coaching guys now. And I'm like, what is going on in this industry? We got Moto coach influencers coming out of the woodworks now, teaching these guys how to ride.
Oh, my favorites, we've got the newest and most modern day techniques.
Oh no! This style is in now. It's like clothing. Yeah, this style's in. So start doing that.
I remember we were talking last time. It's all good and well, looking at the Lawrence brothers or whoever you want to use in the example. but the amount of balance, the strength in their legs, upper body, core, the coordination, the positioning of their body, there's so much amount of work that's gone in to get them to that point to be able to do it at speed and at that level. It's not realistic for a young bloke, a young rider that's only rides once or twice a week for them to be able to do that. So there's got to be like a bit of a separation of goals, doesn't there, mate? It doesn't just happen overnight. It's just years and years of pure hard work and repetition.
Yeah, and you've got to know what stage 1 is to be able to do stage 2 and stage 3 and stage 4. And that's what I think a lot of these other people that have just been racers and become coaches don't understand it. They only know what they've been taught at what level they were at when they finished. So they go straight to that point, but they don't understand even why they're coaching some of that stuff. So,
yeah, it's a fascinating topic for sure, mate. And obviously, have you got any more questions, Jatz? We're sort of wrapping up towards 90 minutes here. We keep talking for ages, mate, but we're all pretty flat out. So, yeah, just any final thoughts for Jatz as well? And yeah, Crawford, thanks for joining us, mate. It's been an awesome chat, and just tell us what's on the horizon for you and the crew and everything, mate. So, yeah, I'll let you go first, Jatz, and then Nato, you got anything for us there?
Nah, man, I got to talk about everything I wanted to. It was good. It was good having a chat with Nath because it's been a while. Well, it's been a while since I've been at any moto race in particular. So yeah, it's good to catch up and find out what's going on and how the sport's changed and everything. Because yeah, like Nath said, used to coach me back in the day. So yeah, a lot of things have changed since then. So it's a good catch up.
yeah, it's always good. And you're looking more and more like your dad every day, mate.
Oh, mate. Let me tell you, the amount of comments I get there, because I'm back on the tools now. I'm working for him. So I'm at these job sites and people mistake him for me. And I was like, mate, come on. That's just straight up disrespect. Because Pete, he's pushing 120 at the moment, kilograms. Ooh. He's getting up there in the weight. And I'm like, geez, I hope I don't resemble that physique. I've got to keep the hammer down on the diet because I'm creeping up there at the moment.
You're going to have to run around the golf course instead of buggy.
Yeah, well, we've started walking now. We used to get the golf buggy every week. Now we've started walking. So, yeah, the fitness is coming back in.
That's good. Yeah, so basically for my program moving forward, we're going into Supercross and then keep a couple going in, junior Aussies and stuff like that. So, and then the MXGP and the sweat tank that we'll get going for Jatz to come down and hang out and do some training for the MXGP. So, I think, moving forward, we'll be into that. We're going to try and sort of calm some rider numbers down a little bit as well and try and get to focus with each of them a bit more. So, it's, it's a hard juggle trying to make it, viable financially and the right number of riders. So we'll keep our crew small and make sure that we're, performing and keep it like that. So got a couple of good, young kids coming up in the Supercross program. So I'm interested for the SX3 class is going to be a good one because a couple of 85 kids are stepping up onto the 250 now. So that'll be one of the things to watch, I reckon.
No, it's going to be awesome, mate. We'll definitely try and get you back on before then, mate, because it's been a ripper chat. We've got a heap we could have covered again. But yeah, thanks again, both of you. It's been an awesome chat, awesome podcast. So obviously, before we wrap up, massive shout out to all the listeners and the fans for supporting the website and these podcasts. And obviously, big shout out to the sponsors in Fly Racing, Firepower, Fuchs Silkaline, and Dirt Store for all the incredible support, as without them, none would be possible. All right, thanks again, lads. We look forward to catching up soon and have a good one.
No worries. Thanks, Ed.
Sounds good.
No worries, lads. Have a good one.